Another member of that trip across country in 2009 was known back then as Jade Atkins. But Jade, I understand you have a totally different name now.
Sort of. It's Jade Atkins Nicolau, so my full name.
It's a beautiful name, and it's great to see you again. Congratulations on having a wonderful family. Tell us a little bit about your life.
My life. I definitely do have a little family now. Since I've graduated, I've really been in the nonprofit world for the past 5 years, but I did go into journalism immediately after San Jose State. I became a photographer with the Padres for a little bit, and kind of naturally transitioned from there to event planning, which somehow spiraled into saving the world and being a social justice warrior, and then sprinkle in 2 kids in there, a little girl and a little boy, add in a lot of social justice again, and now you have this.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations again.
The
School of Journalism thanks you for being a part of this. Can you believe it was 11 years ago that you guys went on that trip in January 2009 to the inauguration, but you went through the landmarks of the Civil Rights South. Do you remember that experience? How do you remember it now?
I do, because it was it's ingrained really in my memory because it's such a defining moment for me. I grew up in Southern California, in Los Angeles, and then San Diego. And I'm a Black woman, so like these are stories that I'd always heard. But to kind of be brought face to face, I had very visceral reactions at several of the places. And I most notably was Emmett Till had in Tallahatchie, Mississippi was not friendly, and it was hard, and there was a lot of ancestral trauma there. And then again, when we finished in Greensboro, North Carolina, before we got to the inauguration, it was again a very visceral reaction to trauma. And it was, I to this day, I say that's the most defining moment, one of the most defining, if not the most defining moment kind of my life, to have come face to face and to realize really what my purpose is. And it's guided me a lot in the past and in my professional life, my personal life too. So very honored that I was able to do that and serve alongside all of you.
Well, I have fond memories of you participating on that trip. And I remember when Dr. Cheers and I organized that, we were curious to pick people who would be able to describe the moment, to talk about your daily activities. Eventually, as you know, CNN invited some of you to give live reports. Do you remember what that was like, being a part of that national exposure as you cross country?
Yeah, I remember at first we thought that it was going to be very local coverage. We thought that maybe, the Mercury would pick it up, maybe the Chronicle, and that was like such a big deal to a bunch of journalism students from San Jose. We were like, yeah, we're going to be in the local paper. And then I do remember at some point we were somewhere, someone was like, we're going to go to Atlanta and we're going to go to CNN and we're going to be on TV. And it was like, what? I think everyone was like, oh, we're real journalists, think we're real journalists, how amazing. And I think people really stepped it up. We were already like, we're the coolest people on the planet. And then that was a moment just for us to be like, people are taking us seriously. They're listening to us. They hear us. They see us. Like, let's show them something. Let's do something great for them. And then I do recall Atlanta. It's very early in the morning.
I'm going to get to that in just a second, but I just want to let you know, local high schools here in the Bay Area were all contacting us. How can I be a part of this? How can I read more of what you all were doing? So yes, you had a very focused audience here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Excuse me for interrupting. You were about to talk about arriving at CNN Center in Atlanta.
That morning, I think it was like super early. It was earlier than I can recall. And if you're from the West Coast, you know that when you travel back east, like early means like 3 a.m. your time. Right. So, or 1 a.m. your time. So we were up crack of dawn and we got there and everyone was tired. I do remember that. I remember we were like running through the studio and at some point somebody mentioned there's a makeup room. And at the time I was like, I don't want to be on national TV and look like this. So I remember I was in the makeup room and they said, oh, you're not going to go on for like 2 hours. So we're like in the makeup room, just sitting there. Like they put my face on and curled my hair a little bit. And I walked out and I went to go look for everyone and they were gone. And I was like, did they leave me? And they're like, no, they're about to go on in 6 seconds. I mean, like literally sprinted across the entire like news floor to get there on time. And then they said, hi, are you Jade? And I don't even know what I said. I just remember being really out of breath running across the newsroom to get back there. But my face looked good. I do remember that. The makeup looked great.
Well, I remember back at San Jose State, we were watching live on television that interview. And I know when Dr. Cheers and I worked with the media to cover you all, we had no idea how you would rise to the occasion. That day, that trip, all of you were just fantastic. It was stressful, it was difficult, but you did it. But the most important part of it was being able to communicate what you were feeling, not only about being on television, but about being in the footsteps of history. Can you describe a little bit more about what that felt like back then?
Back then, so I do remember feeling, there was a lot of feeling of guilt. I do remember that, like feeling guilty that that I had survived, that like my family had survived all of these atrocities. Again, we had went through like Memphis, where we saw like Martin Luther King was assassinated. We saw the blood stained on the floor. Then we were in Mississippi. Then we went to Alabama. We had been to so many places where there was so much trauma. And I do remember feeling guilty and appreciative. And then I remember feeling like everything's going to change from this moment. Like I was so hopeful because I hadn't seen the world in the way that it is, but I thought, this is it. Like, we're gonna have a Black president. That's why we get to be here, because finally they're gonna give us a voice. Like, I have some thoughts on this later, but like at the time I remember thinking like, they're finally gonna give us a chair at the table. Like, this is
Yes,
amazing.
you do have that sensation when you visit those sites. You're very hopeful. I remember, before we get to today's world, I remember you getting off the plane when you came back from the trip. You were so emotional. You were tearful, you were joyful. You were telling me how much you really appreciated that we sent you. Do you remember that moment?
I do. I think I started crying.
Yes, you did.
I do remember crying. And then I remember going outside and I was like, it's hot. And it was like 40 degrees. But I do remember feeling overwhelmed. I remember on the plane, I think we stopped in like Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. And at that point we were exhausted, like 13 days or however many days it was of very little sleep had finally caught up. And I got to the plane and I remember I laid down and the next thing I heard was "We're in San Jose." And I was like, we're here, like, thank God. And I remember I got off the plane and it was like back to reality. And I think somebody said that. I think it was Nick said something
Right.
like, and back to reality. And here we go. Cause there, like when we had got off the plane, there was something that said like, who did he run against? Whoever he ran against, like we saw it. It wasn't Biden. It was, that was his running mate. McCain. We saw something that said McCain. And it was like, people were still like cheering for McCain, even though Barack had won and had just taken the presidency. And I remember Nick said something like, back to reality.
Right.
And I remember feeling like, no, like this can't, no, we're not going back. Like, we're never going back. Like, there's no way that America is ever going to let that happen again. Like, this man promised change and now it's coming. And then I do remember like running into everyone and being so just overcome with that experience.
I'll bet. Now let's fast forward to 2020, where we are as we record this in June, right after that horrible experience with George Floyd in Minneapolis, and the day after day after day protests, more than 3 weeks and counting as we're taping this. What are your thoughts about that so far?
Like, I mean, first, rest in power to George Floyd and like to his family, to Breonna Taylor, who her murderers still have not been arrested, even though we know where they are and we know that they murdered her. And Ahmaud Arbery, all of those folks. But those are just 3 names of people that are murdered like every day by the police, right? Black people, people of color. And at first I remember somebody saying, here we go, like another protest, another riot. And I felt like, I felt so upset. Like, this is not another anything. Like, this can't be another one of these. Like, at first I remember thinking like, oh, here, okay, again. And then I started to realize that more people were like, what was that? What did I just watch? And then more people were like that. And then more people were angry. And then Minneapolis burned down. And then New Orleans burned down. And then people in San Jose, California started to burn it all down. And I started to realize like, this is a unique, those 3 people were lynched. And we just saw the last one. And there was nothing else that white people or anybody else could look at. There wasn't basketball, there wasn't music, there wasn't baseball, there was nothing that could deny. Everybody just witnessed a Black man get lynched on television and nobody did anything. And then the streets, ironically, did everything.
Right.
They were like, we're done. Enough is enough. And I think around the world, that's the theme now. Enough is enough. And America is, you know, we're so egotistical. We think that we're just so great, that we do everything right because this is the American dream. And I'm like, no, that's a white American dream, because the American dream for me doesn't look the same as the American dream for you. And now you're upset because you saw a glimpse of what it looks like. And you might be able to empathize because you feel sorry for this man, but you have no idea what the American dream is for me, or for people that look like me, or for people that look like my kids. It's different. We're not as great as we think we are. I don't know what we were going to make great again if we were never great to begin with.
Mm. And so many people in this country didn't understand at least what you were saying before the incident. After the death of George Floyd, it was amazing to me the numbers of people who were not only glued to their television and going on social media to find everything they could about it, but they were also organizing to get out in the street and to say something and to have a conversation about the relationship between the police and a variety of communities in this country, mostly with people of color. How did you react to that?
I think the mobilization of allies, white allies, and people of color has been tremendous. And again, I think that for a long time, people, they feel like they have a choice to make at this point in time. And silence is no longer an option because it's directly choosing oppression and racism. And it's not, I want to be anti-racist. It's, I want to be pro-Black. Like, I don't want, either you are or you're not. I know there's a really famous Angela Davis quote where she says anti-racist in it. And I'm always like, I really love that quote, except that you're not like either you are racist or you're not. And if you're not, then that means that you're choosing to fight and go out in the streets, not just when it's convenient, not just when it's, I'm going to get some likes and, oh, there's nothing else to do. So let me make sure that I'm out in the streets, even though there was a whole other global pandemic going on. It's because that's the right thing. And that's what you're supposed to do. Because that's the only way that you can show support, is when you see something wrong and you saying that's wrong. And I don't care who else agrees with me, it's wrong and you need to stop. And so for the first time, I think as a Black woman in this country, I don't want to get too optimistic because again, James Baldwin says this so much better, but like, I mean, I hear what America says and then I see what they do. Right. So I don't want to get too excited because I'm seeing what they're doing, but are they going to do it next week? And as I mentioned before, Breonna Taylor, her murderers still haven't been arrested. We passed a whole law for this woman. Murderers are walking around. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
And so am I, to be honest, but I'm also sad. And I'm angry, just like every other African American. We've waited our whole lives, in my case, a little bit longer than you have. But the bottom line is we're fed up with it. We want to see something done. We understand, though, that we have former students who are police officers who are trying to tell us the media is stirring this up too much. We're not all bad. How do you react to those kind of comments?
So I agree. You're not all bad. That's a true statement. That's a very true statement. And if you've done PR ever, then you know that that's a great thing to say because you're redirecting the conversation. We're not all bad. You're right. You're not all bad. But the example that I give to anyone that asks me this is if you had a barrel of apples and you saw that 2 of them on top were rotten, you would not just take out those top 2 and assume that the rest are good. No, you would probably want to take all of them out because the chances are that if those 2 on the top are rotten, it might have spread. And unless you take every single apple out and inspect it and really look and see, are any of these rotten too? Let me also check the barrel while I'm at it because maybe it's something wrong with the container, the system, the foundation is what's making this rot. Then you are actively choosing to allow the rot to spread through the rest of your apples.
Right.
And then you have no good apples. What you have are apples that kill people. Now swap those apples for cops, and that's what you have. Right. So what people are saying now to me when I hear defund the police, I recognize that sounds really radical. That sounds really radical. As I'm not going to say what political party I associate with, but I have a lot of very open-mindedness to me. And defund the police sounds really scary to someone who thinks like me. Because who do you call if someone's going to shoot? Like, oh, do I want to call the cops? I don't know. But they got the guns, they can use them. That's really scary.
Right.
I think we need to walk this back and say, we're not saying get rid of people that we call for help. Like, we still need the Justice League. What we need in addition to the Justice League is the public service, is the mental health, is the access to healthcare, the equitable access to healthcare, are all of these things that play a bigger role in communities and systems and cultures, and all of these things, instead of every time there's something wrong, it's called the police, because they're not equipped. They're not social workers. They're not doctors. They're not nurses. They're police. They're there to do a specific job, and we've given them power to do all of the jobs that people have to go to school for years, and we just give it to the police. So the chances are that they're going to make a mistake, and we're going to allow that rot to continue, because it's easier to just take off what's on the surface than it is to disassemble it or defund it and then put it all back together in the right way. That's what we need to be doing. Defunding or deconstructing or whatever we want to call it, and then putting it back with all the good apples.
Very interesting. Very good plan. One final thought. These videos are designed primarily for our students coming up in the next few semesters, but ultimately this is for posterity. As you know, you put it on the internet, it stays there forever. What do you want to say as a concluding comment as you try to inspire the young generation at San Jose State and everywhere else in school? What should they be thinking at this moment in time?
You know, I think this is a really unique moment in history, because I've heard a lot, this isn't actually a moment, it's a movement. And we're the builders of tomorrow. The generation that came before me paved the way. They did the groundwork, and the generation that came before them grabbed the shovels, and the generation before them built the shovels. And so now here we are at this moment where we're burning it like all down to the ground, and we're saying no more. And I really hope that we just continue that momentum, that we continue to build together instead of destroying it. Because essentially what this is all coming back to is hate. Everything that we've talked about really comes back to hate. And I think we all can agree that it's not working. It's just not. So we need to change, and we have to do something together. And if that means being unpopular, let me just say, every movement in history has always started out the unpopular opinion. Right. That's why it's a movement.
Right.
So if you're gonna join and fight, then join and fight. Because I'm not just some pawn in the evil empire, I'm absolutely a leader in the rebellion. So welcome to the culture change.
And I'd say, look out world, this woman is to be reckoned with. She really makes sense. One final thought, we're gonna get everybody together who went on the inauguration trip sometime in mid-July. I look forward to you bringing those ideas along with whatever else you hear from your former classmates. These recordings will be put on YouTube, and I'm anxious to see how everybody comes together again to try to figure this moment out, because the whole country is trying to do the same thing. I thank you, Jade Atkins, for joining us.
Thanks, Bob, for having me.